Good morning or afternoon, class. Let me adjust the camera real quick. That's a little bit better. All right. I'm going to try to upload some of these YouTube videos for the lessons. This takes me quite a while. It takes me twice as long as the recording it is to upload it. So if it's a 15-minute, it takes me about 30 minutes or more to upload it. But I figured this would be one of the best ways to continue on with class. If you could, pause the video and open up a new window in the Google Classroom, go into the Google Classroom and go to the notes for abnormal psychology. I'm going to pick up where we left off, and I believe we stopped right at slide number 30. So scroll through the slides until you get to slide 30. It has an umbrella with mental disorders on it. The objective is 5.4, describe symptoms and prevalence of two disorders. I have my copy sitting right in front of me in my lap, and hopefully you'll have your copy as well. So I'm going to go through the notes, and so then we understand a little bit more about the two forms of disorders. So the very first one on slide 31 is major depression. So major depression is one of many disorders, but it is a very common one. That's why I picked it to go into depth. IB wants us to understand two forms of mental disorders in some depth. There's way too many for us to go through every single one, but picking at least two. So major depression is cataloged in the DSM, and there is both psychological features that we can see when we interview someone through therapy, trying to check off whether or not they may be suffering from major depression. And then there's also physical traits that we see, lack of energy, lack of a good sleep schedule, or maybe too much sleep, fatigue. There's also cognitive functions that are impaired, maybe bad decision making, maybe the inability to do some basic mental task like math in their head. Maybe more cumbersome for someone who's suffering from major depression. So going on to slide 32, there's emotional. That is usually the canary in the coal mine. The person usually reports once they have a good relationship with their therapist about distress and sadness and loss of interest in their hobbies and in doing day-to-day tasks. There is also some behavioral things that will change, like that sleep change. They may also have suicidal thoughts and avoidance of social company, where they don't interact with friends and family as much. They may become more reclusive. I'll also link some of these videos onto this post on the Google Classroom so you can see some of these videos. So the prevalence. Major depression is very prevalent across the whole world. Different countries may not label it the same thing, but we see that major depression is a common feature across all humans, across all countries. And some countries do record higher rates than others, but it doesn't appear that any country is exempt of major depression. It may just be that some have much lower rates than others. Here in the United States, it has a little bit of data. It appears that about 17.1% of the population at some point is recorded with having symptoms of major depression, which is extremely high. Males appear to have lower rates, probably because of not reporting it. They may not reach out to a therapist or to a physician, whereas females are more likely to seek out help when they have a issue medically or psychologically. Of course, there's some studies on slide 34, some studies related to major depression. The first one found that lifetime prevalence of depression varies across cultures. 3% in Japan and 17% in the US. There's two different countries, two different numbers. I apologize if you hear a bell sound in the distance. I have a cat and she has decided it's time to play. The other study is one that compares different countries as well and looking at the symptoms. And you can see the data there that was compiled in 2009. Comparably to another type of disorder, so bulimia nervosa. This is an eating disorder. So the second disorder that I want to go into a little bit of depth. By the way, we're going to come back to major depression, but I want to introduce both of these two mental disorders. Bulimia, for short, has some symptoms that are recorded in the DSM, and there is psychological, cognitive, and emotional and behavioral symptoms. There can be changes physiological in the person's body. Female, they may have a change in their menstrual cycle. They may have cramps. For both genders, might have digestive problems, fatigue, irritability. Cognitively, they have a low self-esteem, low body image. So how they describe themselves to a therapist or a psychologist would be a very negative compared to the average, the general population. They also have a sense of lack of control. So for those that don't have bulimia, we see that there is control of our eating habits and our not wanting to regurgitate or throw up our food. But for these, they don't see that they have control over it. It is an impulse, kind of like OCD, where if they don't do it, then it becomes an itch and then a burning sensation, and it gets stronger and stronger until they are compelled to react. And it just drives them a little bit, for lack of a better word, crazy. Drives them and pushes them into that compulsion. Emotionally, they may have fears of becoming fat. They have, of course, dissatisfaction of their body, and they may be showing forms of depression. Those that have bulimia nervosa may easily fall into major depression as well. Their behaviors, for those that are bulimic, they tend to go through a manic and a depressive mode. In the manic mode, they'll eat and eat and eat. They'll binge eat a lot of calories on a short period of time, and then they will vomit it up to get rid of those calories out of their system. And then they'll go maybe for hours to days without eating again. And it just goes back and forth, the pendulum swinging between binge eating and then throwing up and then not eating. The prevalence of bulimia nervosa depends from country to country. We see that a lot of the Western countries, like the United States, Canada, those that have strong Western influences, there's higher rates of bulimia nervosa than in some of the Eastern nations. I have some data there on slide number 37 that you can take a look at, and also on 38. The one on 38, in 2003, they performed a meta-analysis. That's a study of multiple studies. So taking research from a lot of different psychologists and compiling it together to try to get a bigger picture. And the research on bulimia nervosa found an increase in people diagnosed with bulimia nervosa from 1970 to 1993. So it is a disorder that is actually on the rise. More and more cases are being documented. Now, that could be that we have more resources available for people to reach out and get help, and then that's getting documented. Or it could be that our culture has changed and led to an increase in this disorder. We're not exactly sure if we can blame it on one or the other, or if it could be both. It may be a factor of better resources available and the change of culture. All right. You may also be wondering what's with the picture of the teeth at the bottom of that slide. So on the bottom of slide 38, one of the warning signs of someone suffering from bulimia nervosa is that the acid from regurgitating their food, the stomach acid that is thrown up, will wear down on the teeth, causing distress first ripping off the enamel of the teeth and then eroding the actual bone. This is a sign of someone who's been suffering from bulimia nervosa for a very long time. It doesn't happen quick, the wear and tear on the teeth, but if someone has been living with this for years, it can be a sign. Another sign may also be on their hands. They may have bite marks on their fingers where they stick their finger down their throat to cause a gag reflex to vomit things up. Don't worry too much about that. That's just a sign that some psychiatrists will look for to see if there is a physical sign of them having this disorder. On slide number 40, etiology. So what is etiology? It's the study of the origins or causes of a disease. Now the DSM does not look at this. The DSM is a diagnosis manual to help psychologists identify if someone has a disorder. It doesn't give treatments because treatments change. We get new medications, we get improvements in therapy, and the DSM doesn't give us an etiology because research is ongoing with a lot of these disorders. So what we may think is the truth today may not be what's considered the truth tomorrow. So we are going to go into the etiology because there is a lot of psychologists that are studying to try to understand what are the root causes of these disorders. So the first one is major depression. The symptoms that you can find in DSM is a depressed mood, and that's going to last for at least 2 weeks. If it's shorter than that, then it's not major depression. It could be a form of depression or anxiety, but it's not major depression unless it lasts longer than 2 weeks. And there's also a loss of interest and pleasure in normal activities, like hanging out with their friends or going out to eat or doing a hobby that they find enjoyable. That's gone. That's no longer there. Sometimes a therapist will sit with a patient and ask them what hobbies that they used to enjoy and inquire as to why they're no longer doing that anymore, to try to dig in there and see if it is major depression. The next slide, which is number 42, one hypothesis for major depression is the serotonin hypothesis. Serotonin, you may remember, is a neurotransmitter. It moves from neuron to neuron through a void, a gap with some fluid called a synapse in our brain. And serotonin, as a neurotransmitter, helps a neuron communicate with another neuron. And a hypothesis that's still being tested is that the cause or the root cause of our major depression may be tied to the levels of serotonin. Serotonin, as I have written here, is a specific neurotransmitter that is produced in a specific neurons of the brain, and they're called serotonic neurons because they produce serotonin. So let me actually go to it was the point above it. Low levels of serotonin may be linked to major depression. So some of the medications that are prescribed for patients with major depression is to boost the levels of serotonin, to increase it. They may have serotonin blockers. So as the serotonin is released from a neuron, it can't be reuptaked into that neuron again. Because sometimes when a neurotransmitter is released and sent to another neuron, it is then sent back to the original neuron it came from. But if there's a block, then that original neuron can't reabsorb it. And that means that that neuron has to make more serotonin, increasing the levels of serotonin. A hypothesis here is that, well, there's just not enough serotonin in those synapses, so we're going to block it from reabsorbing it so the levels increase. Of course, this medication is not fast acting. We don't want to dramatically increase the levels of serotonin fast in the brain. So it is a slow process that those that are doing a form of medication therapy for their major depression they will have to take their medication for maybe 2 to 3 weeks before there is a distinguished difference. Another theory or idea is that there is genetic deposition. So there may be links to certain people's genetics and their high risk of having major depression. Now, I'm not saying that you are 100% shackled to your genetics, but I am saying that some people have genes that put them at higher risk. Like, for example, there's genes that allow for people not to absorb and break down alcohol fast. Some people do break alcohol fast, some people don't. So those that lack the actual genetics to start breaking down alcohol quick get drunk faster, and they are at higher risk of becoming an alcoholic. Same thing here. They are at higher risk of becoming a major depressive patient, but it doesn't mean that they will be, and they just need to be aware. But this is a theory, and it looks at twins, because identical twins is a great way of studying what genetics affect our mind. And they found that identical twins, if one has major depression, the other one is much higher than the average person to also have major depression. So there must be a link there with genetics. The next slide, which was number 44, kind of goes into that. With the monozygotic twins, those that came from the same sperm and egg. One sperm, one egg, and then split into two and became two individuals. Then there is, on the next slide, Beck's cognitive therapy. Beck, a psychologist, has the main argument that depression has to do with one's view of themselves. So if we change their view of themselves, then we can defeat the root of the problem here. So it is training on refocusing your view from the negative to the positive. And you're probably aware of that in therapy, where people will be asked by a therapist to list 3 good things about themselves. And then they can build on that. And the therapist may suggest new hobbies, something that they may be good at, and give them praise for this. Changing from the negative aspect to a positive aspect. To kind of close out with bulimia nervosa on the same things. So on the next slide, we go over to bulimia nervosa. What are the root causes, the etiology of them? Well, bulimia nervosa is an emotional disorder involving distortion of body image and obsession desire to lose weight, in which bouts of extreme overeating is followed by depression and self-induced vomiting, purging, or fasting. So there may be some biological factors, and there was a study done in 1991 to look at this. It investigated risk factors of genetic inheritance in bulimia nervosa, and they had 2,163 female twins who participated in this study, and that's an awesome sample size. One of the twins in each of the pair had developed bulimia, so this was a massive study across multiple countries. The study was longitudinal, so it followed them for many, many years, and the researchers concluded through interviews with the twins to see if the other twin had developed bulimia at basically the same rates compared to those that were not identical twins but fraternal twins. Overall, the relationship for bulimia was 23% in our identical twins compared to 9% in our fraternal twins. So there may be a link there with our identical twins. 23% is still low, but it's higher than the average. The results indicated that the heritability of 55% but leaves 45% for other factors. So whether or not you have bulimia nervosa may be 55% genetics according to their conclusions, but more studies are needed. Also, there is some criticisms of this study. Like, for example, the participants were all women. Bulimia nervosa happens in men too. So we don't want to generalize it just on women. We should also look at cases and the relationships to genetics in men. And this study did not look at environmental factors. Did not look at upbringing, did not look at access to food, did not look at the culture, didn't look at a lot of different things besides their chances for bulimia nervosa. On the next slide, which is 49, there is the body image distortion hypothesis to try to explain the factor of bulimia nervosa. This may be an interesting study that you might want to pause and read this off the slide. But what they did was they took people and showed them 9 pictures of different body shapes, from very, very thin to very heavy. And they had both males and females look at these pictures and pick their ideal body type. So what would they prefer for themselves? And then they were asked to identify which one they thought they were. And of course, that gave some interesting results. Usually, the people would not pick the same for both. Their ideal body type is not what they see themselves as. So maybe there is a cognitive thing going on in our mind where we want something, and in some people, that want becomes so strong that it develops into bulimia nervosa. On slide 51, there's also social cultural factors. Society and culture can influence bulimia nervosa. So in the West, we have some ideal images in our movies, in our magazines, commercials, all over the place about what is the ideal shape for women or for men. For women, it should be a slim shape, hourglass shape. For men, it should be kind of like a triangle with broad shoulders and a thin waist. This is not normal for most people. Yes, some people have that body type, but that is not the average, that is not the norm, and it's not healthy for everyone. But that is what is pushed on us as a society as what our goal should be, and that's not healthy. In the United States, it has at the bottom, there was a study done that 385 middle school girls ages 10 through 14 years old answered questions about eating behavior, body satisfaction, concern about being slender, parents and peers' attitudes, and magazines with regard to weight management techniques and importance of being thin. And they collected that data, and they found on the very next slide that the majority of the respondents said that they received clear messages from fashion magazines, peers, and family members that it is important to be slim. So they're being told all the way around that the goal is to be slim, and that's not good for everyone. They also said that the same sources encourage dieting and other methods to stay as a slender figure. And I know when I get on YouTube, I see ads occasionally on weight loss. On TV, there's ads. There's different diets. Right now, the diet of choice is keto. When I was in high school, it was the Atkins diet. These things get pushed on you as a product. And they want to fat shame you. They want you to believe that you are overweight. So buy their magic product and do their workouts, their diets, their eating calendars, and then you get the figure you want. They're manipulating us. I'll post a couple of these videos along with this that are in the slideshow so you can see them as well. But I believe this is where I want to stop for this video because it's already 25 minutes almost. And I've ended on slide 52. Next, I want to look at cultural and gender variation in these two disorders of major depression and bulimia nervosa.